It's always an honor to introduce the headmaster for the reply. It's made particularly easy in that this is the first headmaster that I can comfortably call Greg, not that I would at an occasion like this, but Mr. Hassenkamp, welcome this evening and thank you very much for agreeing to do the reply, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Mr. Hassenkamp.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ashton. Good evening, Mr. Reela, Mr. Wilkes, Mr. Schroeder, honoured guests, and obviously gentlemen here this evening. Just to reiterate, I think what was said maybe a few minutes ago or an hour or two ago during the course of the evening, I think the fact that we are here this evening at the 101st dinner is a remarkable achievement. It could so easily have been avoided this year, and despite the fact that there are 60 of us here tonight as opposed to however many there may have been last year, I think makes this evening no less significant. It's not really about the fact that we just have to tick the block and, well, we've had the old boys dinner, which means that we haven't had a gap since the Second World War. I don't think that's the point. I think the point is that the stories that have been told, the addresses that have been made are as important as any year. And I think to listen to Stefan tonight, and Stefan, if I can just compliment you on the speech that you delivered. I think it was so Stefan Krichel, it was from the heart. I believe your English has improved tremendously since your first address at the start of the year. Mr. Reela will bear me out on that one. But I think you spoke superbly well. You've made my job a whole lot easier. I don't have to talk about the year in COVID, and I'm so glad I didn't plan to do that because I'd never have been able to do it as well as you did it this evening. So congratulations. And from my side, I only had the privilege of working with you. It wasn't even for 6 months. It was probably closer to 4. But I was hugely impressed by both you and Andre. I think the initiative you took in a very difficult year to lead the school was remarkable, and I think you made a significant impact, so well done. Thanks for the very kind words that have been mentioned about me this evening. I'm so pleased to see that there's no one from the class of 1990 here, because they would have been able to verify that so many of the nice things you've said are not true. So I'm quite relieved that amongst absent friends, many of mine are not here. In preparing for this evening or thinking about what I needed to say, I made a point of saying I'm not going to talk about COVID. And unfortunately, I'm going to break that rule just slightly in the beginning before I get to my address. I think we've all been overloaded with COVID this year, and maybe there are more important issues to consider this evening as opposed to COVID. Mr. Reela, I don't know why. I should have arranged this evening, Mr. Webber or Mr. Ashton, to speak after Mr. Reela, or speak before Mr. Reela, because you never want to speak after him. Once again, thank you for a wonderful, thought-provoking address, which is really true to your custom. But Mr. Reela has spoken about certain aspects of COVID. Mr. Ilsley, I thought in true Mr. Ilsley fashion, I think it was a remarkable toast to the country, has spoken about COVID, and Stefan obviously addressed it in his address. However, I am going to share something with you with regards to COVID. And I think it's just pertinent this evening in terms of this old boys reunion. I didn't have it, and when Mr. Ashton said, well, you've got until 25 to 7 and we will regroup, I knew I had 10 minutes. So one of the privileges of living on the property is I shot home and I printed this quickly and I brought it back. And I'm going to share it with you this evening because as I sat here, I thought it would be relevant to do so and appropriate to do so. It's part of the address I gave at the valediction ceremony about a month ago. So the staff and Stefan and Andre, you would have heard it. In fact, the staff, you're going to hear for the second, possibly even the third time, a story or two of mine, but just laugh and just pretend you haven't heard it before. I'm talking to a different audience this evening. And this I used when I looked for it to use when I was preparing for the valediction ceremony. And I went and I tried to find where I could draw parallels between 2020 and Pretoria Boys High School and any other year in the school that had gone before that was similar. So the first place that you start researching the history of the school is you go back to Mr. Ilsley's book, which he wrote. The book is called Pretoria Boys High School, The Story of a South African School, 1901 to 2001. And in that book, I was drawn to the chapter called War, Rebellion, and Plague, 1914 to 1918. And I found the following, which I think this evening will be as interesting to you as it was to me, and hopefully as relevant as it was to the matrics when I spoke at the valediction evening. and I read and I quote from the book. Anybody visiting the school in about October, in the fourth term of 1918, would have found the school deserted and no trains running on the line that formed the northern boundary. The desolation could be explained by the Spanish influenza pandemic, the worst epidemic in 6 centuries, and one which was spread largely by the movement of people and goods during the war. There was no known panacea, and helpless doctors could do little but offer advice on dealing with the fever as it occurred. Such was the severity of the epidemic that the school was closed for 4.5 weeks. When it had opened, the flu had buried 3 pupils, Kenneth Duncan, David Engela, and Daniel Steinberg, and 2 recent old boys, Jan Bam and Loftus Versveld. They were among the 139,471 people who died in the Union of South Africa that year, the highest number of any country on the continent. The book goes on to say, the epidemic disrupted the cricket season, with the game not being played at all in the fourth term and the matriculation examinations that year being delayed. Recurring cases were still affecting individuals the following year, but by that stage, the worst was over. So I mentioned this all at the valediction ceremony because doesn't it all sound so familiar? We didn't have 4.5 weeks off school. We had 2 months off school, the matrics anyway. It was 3, possibly 4 months for the other forms. There's been no sport literally played this year since the first term, never mind only the cricket in the last term. We very fortunately have had no boys that have succumbed to COVID-19. Unfortunately, there was one parent. We have had one parent who died due to the disease. A further extract that I chose to read from the book was very relevant for the evening of the valediction for the following reason, and it will come together now. I'd like to share it with you as well because I think it's very special, and I think it talks about the history of the school, and I think it talks about one of the reasons why we're here this evening. On the morning of the 11th of November 1918, Mr. Hofmeyer called the few boys who were at the school together to announce that an armistice had been agreed upon and that the guns of war had fallen silent at 11 a.m. Greenwich Meridian time. 2 days later, the headmaster was able to send telegrams to all pupils in outlying areas, informing them that the school would resume and that the epidemic was over. It was time to retrieve something of what was left of the school year. I shared this paragraph on the evening of the valediction for the following reason. If you go into the school museum, you will find the school's original telegram book. In this book, you'll find the original handwritten telegram instruction from Mr. Hofmeyer to a certain Mr. Nicholson of Box 30 Nelsstrom, informing him that his son should return to school. The telegram is dated the 18th of November 1918. On the evening of the valediction, sitting in the hall as part of the leaving group of the class of 2020 was Mr. Nicholson's great-grandson, a third-generation Boys High boy. And I thought it very interesting, relevant, and I thought it very special to share that with the valediction ceremony, and I think it's just as special to share it here this evening. I think in some ways it makes sense of the year that we never had. To return to my address, I'd like to begin my address by replying to Mr. Reela. From my side, Mr. Reela, also very welcome, or a very warm word of welcome back to Pretoria Boys High School. It really is wonderful to have you back on the property. I sent Mr. Reela a photograph about 2 weeks ago after his photograph was put up at the bottom of the master staircase, and I said, it's good to have you back in the building. This evening, it's good to have you back in person. Mr. Reela and I had big plans in terms of the handover of the headmastership. I was meant to come up in April, earlier in the year, where there would have been a number of meetings and get-togethers, but due to all things COVID, this obviously did not take place. The best the two of us could do in the end was to meet on a barren stretch of road somewhere in the middle of the Karoo, just outside of Hanover, as we coincidentally passed one another on our moves to and from the Cape. It may not have been a formal meeting in the Headmasters' study or gathering in the Somerville Pavilion, but it was no less significant. And our meeting on that winter's morning on the 20th of June will always remain a very special moment to me. Thank you for the thoughtful gift which you handed over to me. It too will remain with me forever. Mr. Reela, not only a warm welcome from me, but also a very special word of thank you. Thank you not only for the wonderful, but also fully functional school that you have handed over to me. COVID has been an interesting time for all of us. Not a single person sitting in this dining hall this evening has not been affected personally and professionally by the huge and various implications of the virus. And schools have most certainly not been immune to this. When I took office on the 1st of July, not only did I take over a magnificent school, but I also took over the biggest boys' school in the country that was fully operational and functional. I can assure you that at the time, that was most definitely not the case amongst the majority of schools in our country. Having served as headmaster for the past 6.5 years, I'm fully aware of the many and varied challenges that face education and schools, and this in any normal year. Let's just for the time being forget about all things COVID. In having spent the last 5 months at the school, I can assure you that with the work Mr. Reela and his management team have done over the past 10 years, the school was not only well placed to handle whatever complications COVID threw at it, but more importantly, it is extremely well placed to continue to educate the young men of this country. In taking over Pretoria Boys High School, I will share just 2 of the many aspects that stand out for me to confirm my point. In June this year, I departed a school where, due to the financial pressures being put on that school as a result of COVID-19, we were having to make some seriously tough decisions with regards to staff salaries and appointments. With the ripple effect of COVID-19, we have all seen the financial fallout in schools, some of which have been severe. On arriving in Pretoria, it was truly reassuring to inherit a school where every single staff member had the assurity that their employment would remain in place and that there would be no salary restrictions for the foreseeable future. That is not to say that Pretoria Boys High School's financial situation has not been affected by COVID. Nothing, in fact, could be further from the truth. But what it does say is that the financial model of the school is strong, with sound financial structures and management in place that under difficult circumstances have been able to navigate this complicated and unpredictable course. COVID-19 has been one of many challenges the world and schools have had to face this year. Coupled with COVID-19, all of us in this country have also been affected by the Black Lives Matter movement in one way or another. Once again, schools have been at the coalface of this. Just as the school has managed to negotiate COVID-19 seemingly unaffected, not for 1 second should any of us think that it has coincidentally been able to also manage the issues of Black Lives Matter calmly and responsibly. Pretoria Boys High School, being the South African school that it is, was not affected during the height of this movement in the country. In many provinces in the country, schools were thrust into the spotlight and many tough questions were being asked. A number of schools were thrown into anarchy, in fact, some of which are on our doorstep. The potential influence on the school should not be underestimated. Pretoria Boys High School had its own serious issues to deal with in this regard, and it is no coincidence that these were dealt with without media being involved, yet in an open and transparent process. It is easy to lead when things are going well. The true test of a leader comes when things start to fall apart. Not only were these issues at hand dealt with assertively and fairly, but the preparation that had taken place in the years before had a direct result on the positive outcomes of these dealings. All of us have Pretoria Boys High School's best interests at heart, and the above 2 examples are just 2 recent incidents where we all have a lot to be grateful for in terms of the strong leadership Mr. Reela has offered our school over the past 10 years. I've said it before and I will say it again. There's no doubt in my mind that Mr. Reeler was the right headmaster for this school at the right time. Each headmaster has his own strengths and his own character. What I will bring to Pretoria Boys High School will be different to what Mr. Reeler has brought. But it is in each of us, bringing our own strengths, that collectively as headmasters we will ensure that Pretoria Boys High School continues to go from strength to strength. Mr. Reeler, congratulations on a job well done in leading our school. It goes without saying that Pretoria Boys High School is better because of your influence and because of your leadership. You are here to remain true to yourself. You are here to lead a school. Both of these you did, and you did them well. You leave me an outstanding, traditional, modern, South African school, and I'm fully aware of the significant shoes I have to fill. Thank you for this, and congratulations on a job well done. On a more personal note, thank you also for the support you offered to me, not only in my time as your deputy at the school, where you encouraged me to spread my wings and to look for goals beyond Boys High, but just as importantly during my time in Hermanus. As a young and inexperienced headmaster, there were many emails and phone calls made from the Hermanus High School's headmaster's office to the headmaster's study at Pretoria Boys High School. These were always greeted warmly, and whether it be advice, policies, or just a general chat, your openness and willingness to share was always appreciated. Thank you very much for your support. In terms of my appointment, as I've mentioned, it is wonderful to be back at the school on the hill. I've returned to Pretoria Boys High School with my wife, also a teacher, my daughter Megan, who's in Form 3 at Afrikaans Meisies Hoër, and my son Robert, who still cannot remove the smile from his face after being admitted to Pretoria Boys High School. I was chatting to somebody earlier this evening, I can't remember who it was, and they asked me, how's the family settled in and how's your son settled in? And I relayed the story to them. We returned to school, or the matrics returned to school on the 1st of June. I don't remember when the rest of the school came back as we phased them in. I started on the 1st of July, and I think the Form 1s and 2s returned a month or two after that. I'd obviously been here for a month, and Robert, my son, arrived back at school, and he must have attended school after I'd been here for about a month. I'll never forget going home that afternoon and arriving home and looking for Robert and calling him over and saying, Robert, how was your first day at school? And that smile literally was from ear to ear. And he just said, Dad, this is the best thing ever. So for me on its own, that was just worth coming back for, just to see that face. As all of you are aware by now, I returned to Pretoria Boys High School after having spent 6.5 years at Hermanus High School. Hermanus High School was for me an amazing experience. I grew immensely as a professional, but perhaps even more so as a person. Leaving Pretoria Boys High School at the time was not an easy decision, but looking back, it was the best decision I and my family ever made. Looking back, it stands out as the best 6.5 years of my life. Not only am I grateful for the experience the town of Hermanus and the school offered me, but more importantly, I'm grateful for the opportunity it afforded me. Would I have applied for the headmaster position of Pretoria Boys High School had I not left Pretoria Boys High School? Had I not left Pretoria Boys High School and I'd applied, would I have been appointed? Had I been appointed, would I have been the right person to appoint? When I arrived in Hermanus, many people asked me what my plan was. To be perfectly honest, there was no plan. Hermanus High School was the next step in my career, and my only plan was to be the best headmaster of that school that I could be. That plan, in fact, very quickly changed during the course of the year, and by the end of that year, my plan was simply to survive. Not being part of a plan, it was initially not an easy decision to come back to Pretoria Boys High School. Hermanus, as you can imagine, is a wonderful place to live and a superb place to raise your family. Hermanus High School is a great school. It is well placed with great staff, and a very supportive community. The school has much to offer, and there's so much to be excited about. Initially, I was undecided about whether to apply for the position or not. After having come to terms with the fact that the position was available, Amanda and I had a number of discussions of what we thought best to do, not only for me, but also for our family. We came to the decision that I would come up during the month of June, July last year for the old boys' dinner. And it's very strange when you look back on things, how these things work out. And no, I wasn't transporting furniture. Although that lamp is going to look very good in my office. So being undecided, the arrangement that Amanda, my wife, and I made was, I said, let me go up to Pretoria Boys High. Let me go up to Pretoria for the weekend. I've been invited up to speak at the old boys' dinner. And let's just see how it goes. I'm sure when I come back after the dinner, I'll have a better idea of what I need to do. I duly came up. I think what's important to note is that during my time in Hermanus, I had very little to do with the school. You get involved in your new career or your new school, and that becomes your priority. I must say that my link to Pretoria Boys High School was my wife, who's an avid Facebook fan. So I got regular filters of what was going on at the school. And my son kept in touch with Pretoria Boys High School. So whether we beat Jeppe at hockey or lost to Parktown at water polo, I was very up to date with particularly the sporting results. But I said, let me come up to Pretoria Boys High School and get a feel for the school and see where it is, and we'll make a decision after that. And the day remains very clear in my mind. I came to the school in the morning. I met with Mr. Reel in his office, and we had a very constructive discussion. Then I took the time to walk through the school buildings and then to walk through the grounds. In the process, I bumped into a number of boys and had a few discussions with them. I arrived down at the Hill Astro, and I watched a pretty stubborn St. Benedict's team push our boys quite hard in the first half. In the second half, our hockey team got stuck into them and sorted them out as I expected them to. After finishing watching the hockey, I took a walk over to Brooks Rugby Field. And as I was walking across Hofmeyer Oval, it struck me, and it became so easy. I remember the day as if it was yesterday. It was a perfect Highveld winter's day. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. It was blue skies. And literally on the middle of Hofmeyer Oval, I knew this is the place I want to be. In making the decision to come back to Pretoria, the obvious question from all people in Hermanus was, why on earth would you want to go back to Pretoria? But what the people in Hermanus will never understand, and what I was reminded of as I walked across Hofmeyer Oval on that winter morning, is that it is not Pretoria Boys High. It is not Pretoria that one comes back to, but rather Pretoria Boys High School. And there's a huge difference. Unless you have been part of this establishment, you will never understand. The point I'm making about coming back to Pretoria, as opposed to Pretoria Boys High School, was so easily illustrated to me through a very interesting experience that I had, or two. In June 2018, if I retract 2 years, I had to come up to Pretoria. My daughter was playing netball up here, and she had a netball tournament up here. So we drove up to Pretoria to come and watch her play netball. In that June of 2018, we left mid-afternoon Hermanus, and we drove halfway, and we stepped over somewhere in the Karoo. We had an early start the next day. Probably about 6:30 in the morning, we were sort of heading through the Free State, just entering into Gauteng. The sun was coming up. My wife was sitting next to me, and we looked around, and I looked to her and I said, "Sure, can't we be glad we live in the Western Cape?" I said, "Look at this. It's flat. There are no mountains. It's dry. It's dusty." I said, "We're not even near Gauteng. Can you see the smog?" I said, I'm so glad we're going up for a week and we can head back to the Western Cape. A year later, it was 2019, a year later, 2020 this year, we did the same trip. This time we were moving back to Pretoria. So we left mid-afternoon, we stepped over at the same place. The next morning, about 5 o'clock, we got on the road, and at about 6:30, we were just leaving the Free State and entering Gauteng. I looked across to my wife. And I said, look at that beautiful sunrise. Doesn't it just look different on the Highveld? And look at these beautiful rolling plains. Look at how the maize is gently swaying in the wind. Isn't it wonderful to be back on the Highveld? The point I'm making is, coming back to Pretoria, or coming back to Pretoria Boys High School, are two very different things. And I can assure you that being back is amazing. I leave nothing in Hermanus. It was a great 6.5 years, but I, my wife and my family are extremely chuffed to be back. As good as it is to be back, I'm fully aware of the challenge that lies ahead. I'm fully aware of the responsibility I've been given. The responsibility of upholding 120 years of tradition. The responsibility of following in the footsteps of the 7 great former headmasters that have gone before me. I'm fully aware of the responsibility I carry to the staff, the boys, the parents, the old boys, and very importantly, the community of Pretoria as a whole. The responsibility of ensuring that Pretoria Boys High School remains a flagship school in the country. Or maybe I should say, in ensuring that we are the flagship school in the country. As Stefan mentioned, possibly the best school in the world. And the responsibility this school, together with many other similar schools quite just like us, has in terms of the success of this country. I'm fully aware that my honeymoon period is about to end. Come the 1st of January, things will be very different. Pretoria Boys High School, as does every other school in this country, has many challenges to face. Mr. Schroeder always used to say the difference between a good school and a great school is the involvement of its old boys. Having learned lessons in Hermanus, I can assure you that this is the truth. In Hermanus, we had the community which worked with the school and made a significant difference. At Pretoria Boys High School, that community is the old boys. As I've said to my staff, whatever success this school is to achieve during my time as headmaster will not be achieved due to my efforts alone. It will be achieved as a direct result of the collective efforts of the many people that I have around me. And you, the old boys, I include as those people. I'm excited about the future of our school. And in being excited about the future of our school, we need to once again become excited about the future of our country. It is schools such as ours that will make this country work. I look forward to getting to know you and reacquainting myself with many of you over the years ahead. And I look forward to working with you going forward. I look forward to the contribution that together we are going to make so as to ensure that Pretoria Boys High School remains the outstanding and influential institution that it is. Thank you for the warm welcome this evening, and I can assure you that it's good to be home. Thank you.